Okay. My video presentation, is going to focus on cognitive psychology. I actually had a couple other ideas of things that I was going to do, but they were both covered in class by other students, and so I felt like it would look like I was jumping on the bandwagon. I wrote a paper actually on the Stanford prison experiment by Professor Zimbardo, and then I was going to do a presentation on the Memory Palace, which is something that intrigues me. But I decided to, excuse my French, shit can all that and go this route instead. So, cognitive psychology. All right. Um, so we know from class this quarter that psychology can be loosely defined as the study of mind, emotion, and behavior. One of the major fields of study within psychology is cognitive psychology, which is what we're going to focus on here. Cognitive psychology is primarily concerned with the explanation of thought processes through the development of theoretical mental systems. Cognitivism is relatively broad in its approaches to psychology and is really only linked in its goal to create hypothetical mental structures to explain behavior. Uh, it's difficult to say what the exact history of cognitive psychology is, but most agree that the ideas that make up the perspective can be traced back to ancient Greece. But it isn't really until modern times that cognitive psychology has gained significant prominent status. Generally, the 1960s are thought to be the decade of the cognitive revolution, led by such prominent scholars as Piaget and Noam Chomsky, who's still around, and many of you may have heard of him. Prior to this revolution, behaviorism was really considered to be the dominant school of thought in psychology. In 1967, with the publication of Cognitive Psychology by Nazir, not sure how to pronounce his name, the field of psychology really began coming into its own with the first ever outline of major research within the field and significant concepts for this new psychological science. The, the goals of cognitivism are to attempt to understand the ways in which the several processes of the mind work through use of the scientific research method. Cognitive psychology looks to emphasize the importance of the mind as it relates to behavior, um, which had previously been disregarded by behaviorists. Uh, the main focus of cognitive psychology is placed on thinking, memory, perception, attention, pattern recognition, consciousness, decision making, language, and attention. As Paul Barber said in Positive Cognitive Psychology, um, it aims to understand the mental accompaniment of everyday perceptions and actions. By devising mental structures of mental functions and the way in which information is processed, it could then be possible to explain observable behavior. The most significant concept of cognitivism is the computer or information processor metaphor, which basically equates the brain and its functioning to that of a computer processor and vice versa. Professor Peter French, I know he's taught in Germany, he's taught in France, I think he's even taught over at Berkeley or done some speaking at Berkeley. Um, he said that this idea of the mind as a computer processor really underlines the majority of theoretical empirical research in the field. This analogy relates the mind to a computer with sequences of computational processes. It was a paper on mathematical theory, communication by Claude Shannon that first presented the idea that for information to be communicated, it would have to travel via signals through a sequence of stages and transformations. By adding the important dimensions of the mind, this theory gave a substantially more complicated view of human behavior, especially in comparison to similar stimulus response theories formed within behaviorism. This allowed us to have a more mechanical view of the human mind and behavior. Psychologists began to view the mind as being a computer with programmed software to perform defined functions. Cognitivism also introduced the concept of an intervening process between stimuli and responses, and that associative relations were not as significant in learning as the learning of concepts and categories. It was further stated by L.J. Kamen that stimulus value can actually be assessed by the brain. Kamen demonstrated this through experiments with rats where he observed that rats noticed and were conditioned to anticipate an electric shock from a certain cue. There are many influential cognitivists with ideas that help shape cognitive psychology as we understand it today. William Wundt, who we've talked about in class, touched on him a little bit and read about him. He was a psychologist during the 1870s. He's often credited as the founder of psychological science. He authored the first psychology textbook and was founder of the first university-based psychology laboratory. His opinions and work could classify him as a cognitivist. He also developed the first method of scientific research to analyze perception and sensations. Claude Shannon, his writings were kind of gave birth of information processing theories. Nazir stated that the basis of cognitive processes is perception, which acts as a building block for all cognitive thought. In addition, Nazir, he was responsible for first defining cognitivism as a branch of psychology. Noam Chomsky, who's actually a linguist, sorry, lost my train of thought. Noam Chomsky, who's actually a linguist, had several publications like Syntactic Structures in 1957 and a Review of Skinner's Verbal Behavior in 1959. His writings were considered to be groundbreaking, playing a significant role in the rise of psycholinguistics and the decline in the popularity of behaviorism. Chomsky's argument was that language and its acquisition were formed on a basis of pre-existing mental rules, structures, and syntactical abilities, rather than learnt solely by a stimulus-response system. Jean Piaget, the Swiss psychologist, conducted research and found that children of different ages have dramatically different abilities to understand concepts and reason, and theorize that there must be a series of stages of development that humans go through, which he named the mental schemes. He went further to state humans experience universally the same sequence of stages, although at slightly different ages. Another contributor was Donald Broadbent, who made a distinction between a short-term memory and long-term memory, a discovery which still underlines much of the research and experimentation. He created models of attention and memory and led to the development of countless models of cognitive processes and the formation of the separate area of cognitivism. Those are just a handful of the cognitivists that have made a significant contribution and impact to this area of psychology. Since cognitive psychology is concerned with the mind and chiefly unobservable mental processes, there's a lot about cognitive psychology that remains based on theory. Uh, as we all know, theories are formed and or tested in a manner that's rooted in the scientific approach. Experimental methods are used frequently in the field, which independent variables are manipulated and dependent variables are measured. Within cognitive psychology, there are six main research methods which are used in conjunction with standard hypothesis testing and inferential statistics, which inferential statistics is it's basically inferring or presenting an idea or ideas based on data collected. Um, one of these six methods, is the chronometric method, which it involves the calculation of speed of certain mental functions according to reaction times. There's the memory method, which attempts to measure between three separate memory aspects by using various memory tests. There's case studies are useful for determining specific mental operations used in various tasks. Many insightful case studies were conducted on suspected brain-injured war veterans, which led to data concerning perception, memory, and language skills. Cross-population studies can be effective in researching differences between the mental operations of various population groups. A fifth technique, or the fifth technique, involves measuring brain activities through methods such as PET scans, in which scans of the brain activity are conducted by injecting radioactive isotopes into the brain, which further lead to our sixth method of computational modeling, which is the mapping of possible cognitive networks and processes through computer simulations, which is it's a very exciting example of the effect of technological advances upon cognitive psychology. It's actually pretty neat stuff. Um, from what I've read, the theories and concepts in cognitive psychology as a whole don't have a significant impact upon the famous nature versus nurture debate. Cognitivists generally don't clearly favor nature or nurture. However, they emphasize the existence of a naturally occurring system of mind and thinking, much like Chomsky's idea of pre-existing linguistic capacity and syntactical skills. Um, Piaget theorizes or theories in definite stages in mind's development, which are invariably and biologically present in all humans, is an idea that emphasizes the significance of natural influences. Um, Cognitivism is a broad field to study, meaning it's very difficult to encompass every specific and diverse idea to complete explanations of behavior. The experiments are limited to studying extremely precise functions or processes of the mind. Further, the fact remains that while much behavior is observable, mental processes are not, even with computer modeling. Therefore, many of the cognitive concepts and theories are exceedingly difficult to concretely prove. Cognitivism gives a somewhat limiting mechanical view of human nature and behavior, while understanding and hypothesizing over the specific mental processes may be a vital step to understanding behavior. No emphasis or consideration is placed on the influence of environmental factors upon behavior. So this leads to an incomplete method of explaining human behavior. Studying the specific mental accompaniments of behavior has a limited impact on discovery of methods of which to control, treat, manipulate behavior. Cognitivism is, by many, considered as the dominant perspective in psychology today. This extremely broad science, with many notable contributors, as I mentioned, Piaget, Chomsky, Shannon, is concerned with the inner workings and processes of our mind. It is difficult to summarize each specific topic area, except to describe its aim to understand the mental accompaniment of behavior. Um, Through the scientific method, experiments, inferential statistics, hypothesized mental structures, and theories, cognitivism provides a complex yet mechanical view of the mind and in its relationship to behavior. It's generally more focused on attempts to understand and interpret what accompanies behavior rather than causes of behavior, um, or ways in which it can be manipulated. However, it would appear that it fails to give a complete and thorough explanation of human behavior, as it is specifically focused on the mind and not concerned with other significant influences such as environment and culture. Nevertheless, cognitivism is a strong, imperative, and fascinating branch of psychology. That concludes my video presentation. I hope it was informative and you enjoyed it. Thanks for the fun quarter, and we'll see you around. Bye.